The double doors to the conference room were immediately flung open, and standing in the doorway was a bedraggled, handcuffed and manacled Richard Allen. He was flanked by two enormous military policemen who, taking hold of an arm apiece, swept rather than escorted him into the room. Oscar South, in full military uniform, walked in behind them. "At ease," said the President. Then he turned back to Rockman and said to him, "David, this is the man who framed your economist, Professor Maloney." Rockman gulped. The story he told us is incredible. A cartel of foreign cosmopolitan bankers has hijacked the Federal Reserve System." "They have," said Rockman. "And, most incredibly of all, David, they have done it not only right under your nose, but through your bank." Rockman feigned surprise. This wasn't quite the terminology he'd have used, but he knew exactly what the President meant. "This foul group of mainly European bankers has been using the likes of him," he pointed to the prisoner with dramatic effect, "to blackmail and coerce members of the financial elite into toeing their line on credit creation. And because you had the courage to attack their monopoly, they have targeted you." "They have?" said Rockman incredulously. I did?" "Yes," said the President. "David, your life is in danger. The House of Rothstein has hired a far-left terrorist group to assassinate you because of your appointment to Professor Maloney. I have ordered the Pentagon to take you into protective custody until the terrorists have been apprehended." He called out again, and a second set of military policemen marched into the room. James Hunter pointed at the banker and said, "Sergeant, arrest that man, for his own protection." The two men advanced on Rockman, seized an arm apiece, and as the committee men looked on flabbergasted, hauled the banker to his feet and virtually frog-marched him out of the room. The President turned to Oscar South, who saluted him and asked for further instructions. "Take the prisoner away," he said to the military policeman, staring at the manacled faggot in disgust. Then turning back to his aide-de-camp, he said, "Bring in Professor Maloney." South disappeared and reappeared shortly with the Professor. James Hunter smiled benignly at the remaining committee members and said, "Gentlemen, I had to place Mr. Rockman in protective custody for a very simple reason. He would never agree to the proposals I am about to make, and that would undoubtedly endanger his life still further." "How, may I ask, Mr. President?" piped up Richard, the Wall Street economist again. "That would be far too difficult for me to explain," said the President. "However, I am sure that David Rockman will be more than happy to explain. I can arrange for you to join him if you wish." "No," said Richards, obviously deeply shocked that such a normally easygoing man as the President had suddenly taken on such a forceful manner. He was also in fear of his life as much as anything else. "That's good," said James Hunter. "Anyone else want to go and ask Rocky about the reason your lives will be in danger unless you do exactly what I say?" For a man, they shook their heads and protested vehemently that they understood all too well. "Good then," he said. "Well, now I will leave the Professor to explain the mechanics of credit creation to you all. I have other business to attend to." The other business was to convince Rockman that unless he agreed to go on national TV and call for an audit of the Federal Reserve System, he would pay with his life. This proved remarkably easy, as by then South had already convinced the banker that they had gathered enough evidence on him to put him away for 20 or 30 years. The banker had at first insisted that he be allowed to contact his lawyer and would say nothing until he had taken legal advice. "We don't want you to talk, Mr. Rockman," said South. "We want you to listen, for the benefit of all mankind, and for your own good," he added, in as threatening a tone as he could manage. The following week, the reconvened committee, by now renamed yet again to the Committee on Energy and Financial Reform, announced that the manufacture of armulators will be undertaken by the issue of non-interest-bearing bonds. Later, the committee announced it was to set up a working party that would look into the operation of the Federal Reserve and make recommendations as to how this obviously antiquated central banking system could be revamped so as to provide cheap credit, the lifeblood of the manufacturing community. During all this time, nothing was said about Rockman's preventive detention, because this had become a well-deserved rest in a nursing home. No details about the banker's nervous breakdown were made public, but it was understood that he had been treated by a special doctor appointed by the President himself. The audit of the Federal Reserve System caused panic amongst the moneyed aristocracy, but proceeded incredibly smoothly. An executive order was passed which required all ownership of the Fed's A stock to be declared within 3 months on pain of forfeiture. There were loud protests from the Federal Reserve Board itself, but James Hunter overcame the problem by sacking a lot of them. Not a single owner of the A stock came forward, and when member banks were confronted with charges of ownership, they all vigorously denied it. Professor Maloney recruited a number of fellow travellers to overhaul the financial system and arranged for the creation of a system of dividend payments direct to every citizen. The rationale for this was that as banks did not actually lend the money of their customers but created credit, depositors were not entitled to interest payments and would in fact have to pay a fee in future for the privilege of the bank holding their money on deposit. Naturally, this did not appeal to the wealthy, but the plus side was that, as in future all banking was to be conducted on a fee rather than an interest basis, the cost of borrowing money fell dramatically, and taxation all but disappeared. The money that would have gone to feeding the interest payments of a bunch of anonymous bankers was then diverted into the dividend payment, and this certainly had favourable repercussions for the poorest in society, as not only did taxation fall, but the unemployed received their dividends totally tax and means interest-free, which in turn stimulated the economy by destroying the poverty trap into which so many of the poorest members of society became enmeshed. This was of course by no means the end of all economic problems, but the abolition of all public debt throughout the United States, and by the resulting chain reaction of reforms throughout the world, freed all nations from the shackles of the international financial cabal. The most amazing thing about it all was the timidity with which the great finance houses acquiesced. Although the network of blackmail, bribery, coercion and general corruption with which the Rothstein-Rockman axis had subdued nation-states had certainly not been a figment of anyone's imagination, least of all South's or Professor Maloney's, future historians would conclude that the real manacles of mankind, which Hunter, South and Maloney had shattered, were not of a massive or pervasive financial conspiracy, but of simple human nature, such as inevitably occurs when one group of men attains power over others. What had made the power of the Rothstein-Rockman financial cabal so apparently omnipotent was the fact that it existed for so long and had operated virtually in secret. That was until a stranger from the other side of the Pleiades had dropped out of the sky and bestowed upon mankind the greatest gifts since Prometheus stole the fire from heaven.